Welcome. This is Brandy Rose Smith live in the Forbidden Library, and today, as is tradition on Sunday, it is a reading day. And we are continuing to read Pride and Prejudice. This is the 8th stream of Pride and Prejudice. But we're only 61% of the way through. I have no clue on anything that has happened in this story, because my mind keeps spacing out as everything else burns into background noise. Well, that's fine. As long as it's relaxing background noise, that's okay. You don't actually have to listen to what I'm saying. Hello, everyone! Hello, Double Size Phantom! Hello, Luke! I'm glad you could stop by even if you can't stick around for this stream with your lovely luck. Hi, Dendy. I apologize. If I scheduled this stream for 8 o'clock rather than for like half an hour from now, which would have been my 8 o'clock, rather than 7:30, then I apologize. That's my bad. I meant to schedule it for now, but that's the way it is. Oopsity doopsity. Oh well. We're gonna carry on. Hello, Lucas. Hello, Jabba Hopper. Come. I'll try and give you something of a recap as to what's going on after I have a small sip. I would normally have a cup of tea on me, but I kind of lost track of time. We were making a rice cooker dinner this evening, and we put everything in the rice cooker, and we set the rice cooker to go, but then we were sitting there going, oh, it smells really nice. Oh, but why hasn't the rice cooker gone off yet? It had gone off like 15 minutes ago, but we didn't check it and we just didn't hear it. We were too busy watching Fairy Tale. So I ended up eating dinner a bit late. I had to shovel it down, and then I didn't get time to make my cup of tea either, so it's kind of sad, I'm not gonna lie. But here we are. Let me give you a best I can recap of Pride and Prejudice right now. So, cursed fairy tale. Nothing good comes from it. Nothing good comes from it, but I'm invested. And Lucy got a magical girl transformation and it was so good. Anyway, Pride and Prejudice, Pride and Prejudice, Pride and Prejudice, Pride and Prejudice. So, in Pride and Prejudice, there is a lady called Elizabeth Bennet, and she's not like other girls. She, in fact, is very headstrong. And then a man moves to town. This man is Mr. Bingley, and Mr. Bingley brings with him his sister and his friend. Fairy Tale's your favorite Jane Austen movie. His friend, Mr. Darcy. Now, they go to a ball, and Mr. Darcy is an arse and insults Elizabeth within earshot. He doesn't know that she heard it, but he did. She did hear it. But Mr. Bingley starts to fall for Elizabeth's sister Jane, who goes over to Mr. Bingley's house and gets ill and then can't come home. So Elizabeth goes there, ends up talking to a lot of their friends and everything like that, and gets a bit close to Mr. Darcy. And eventually they go home. So, after that, Mr. Bingley leaves town, and they're like, oh no, we were so sure that Mr. Bingley and Jane were going to get married, but it didn't really happen. And Jane was quite heartbroken, she was, yes. So she went off to go stay with aunt for a little while. Meanwhile, their cousin, Mr. Collins, came to visit. Now, Mr. Collins is in line to inherit the estate that the Bennets live in, because the Mr. Bennet had 5 daughters, and women can't inherit things. That's stupid. So, he was coming to go marry one of his cousins because he thought that would be a way to atone for this terrible predicament he put them in. He wanted to marry Elizabeth. Elizabeth was like, no, you give speeches when you speak and I hate you. Not in those words, but he's not a good guy. He's very up the arse of his patroness, Catherine de Bourgh. So, being spurned by his cousin, he decides to marry his cousin's best friend instead, Lady Lucas. So Lady Lucas goes off to go live with Mr. Collins, and they invite Elizabeth to go around and visit them, because Lady Lucas does know that she did not make the best decision in the world, and she did mostly marry him for a comfortable life more than anything else, because he has a really rich lady providing him all that he has, and they will never want for anything. So she was like, okay, I'll put up with him. But Bestie, you have to visit me. So Bestie goes to visit, and Catherine de Butter is, I can't remember how, connected to Mr. Darcy, and Mr. Darcy comes to visit while she is there in Catherine de Butter's estate. And in that time, they get to talk more and everything, until one night Mr. Darcy goes to find Elizabeth and proposes marriage. However, Elizabeth has a few qualms with this, and one of them being that it was in fact Mr. Darcy that pulled away Mr. Bingley from her sister and caused her sister a lot of heartbreak. So that's one of the many reasons she had. He gave his explanation to her in a letter and how he saw things, and she kind of did understand, because her sister isn't as outward in her emotions, so he thought that maybe her sister wasn't as into Mr. Bingley as he deserved, but she was. It's just she's not open with it. And eventually Elizabeth went home, and now she's home, and her little sisters are being terrible. And they have plans to pretty much stalk a platoon of soldiers all the way to Brighton over summer, because they are very determined to snatch themselves husbands. There's also one of those soldiers called Mr. Wickham, who Elizabeth's had some time with, but Elizabeth now knows many secrets about Mr. Wickham. That Mr. Wickham did some bad shit. Mr. Wickham tried to marry Mr. Darcy's sister purely for revenge, out of spite. When does the zombie outbreak happen? Not in this version. There is a version of that, but not in this version. But Brighton, of all places, Brighton is especially not so much. Well, probably now as well. Brighton Beach is a popular place to go in the summer. It is not too surprising to think they would like to go to Brighton for the summer. Also, howdy, Bri, hope you're doing well today. I am doing well. Lighthouse, I'm doing good. Hello, Candy Guy. Good evening. Let's get into it. I'm not repeating that catch-up for you, for the record. Okay, I think that's pretty much most of Pride and Prejudice covered so far. Let's go. The first week of their return was soon gone. The second began. It was the last of their regiment's stay in Merton, and all the young ladies in the neighbourhood were drooping apace. The dejection was almost universal. The elder Miss Bennets alone were still able to eat, drink and sleep, and pursue the usual course of their employments. Very frequently they were reproached for this insensibility by Kitty and Lydia, whose own misery was extreme, and who could not comprehend such hard-heartedness in any of the family. Oh my! How do they not care that the handsome men are leaving town? Yes, Lucas, you get to live comfortably with the guy who makes speeches instead of talking to people. He's an arse, but he'll keep you fed. Good heavens, what is to become of us? What are we to do? Would they often exclaim in the bitterness of woe. How can you be smiling so, Lizzie? Their affectionate mother shared all their grief. Fucking mother. The Bennet mother, the gold digger extreme, the queen of all you must get married to a rich man. She remembered what she had herself endured on a similar occasion 25 years ago. I am sure, said she, I cried for 2 days together when Colonel Miller's regiment went away. I thought I should have broke my heart. I am sure I shall break mine, said Lydia. If one could but go to Brighton, observed Mrs. Bennet. Oh, yes, if one could but go to Brighton, but papa is so disagreeable. A little sea-bathing would set me up for ever, and my Aunt Phillips is sure it would do me a great deal of good, added Kitty. Such were the kind of lamentations resounding perpetually through Longbourn House. Elizabeth tried to be diverted by them, but all sense of pleasure was lost in shame. She felt anew the justice of Mr. Darcy's objections, and never had she before been so much disposition to pardon his interference in the views of his friend. No, one more thing I forgot in the recap was one of the reasons Mr. Darcy broke up his sister and his friend is because when they met the family and the mother was like, oh, it's such a short thing. Oh, he's so handsome, such a catch. Basically, the family embarrassed them so badly and was so gold diggery that Darcy was like, nah, he cannot marry into this family. I gotta save a bro from this. He cannot. So that's why Elizabeth is kind of extra embarrassed by her family right now. But the gloom from Lydia's prospect was shortly cleared away, for she received an invitation from Mrs. Foster, the wife of the colonel of the regiment, to accompany her to Brighton. This invaluable friend was a very young woman, and very lately married. A resemblance in good humour and good spirits had recommended her and Lydia to each other, and, out of their 3 months' acquaintance, they had been intimate too. The rapture of Lydia on this occasion, her adoration of Mrs. Foster, the delight of Mrs. Bennet, and the mortification of Kitty, are scarcely to be described. Wholly inattentive to her sister's feelings, Lydia flew about the house in restless ecstasy, calling for everyone's congratulations and laughing and talking with more violence than ever, whilst the luckless Kitty continued in the parlour, repining at her fate in terms of as unreasonable as her accent was peevish. God, there are some words we don't use in there. I love the use of the word violence in these older stories. I love that violence isn't physical harm. It's just exacerbation of what they're doing. It's just like more. It's an exclamation of it. It's a increase in whatever they're doing. It's really good. I love that use of violence. I also love peevish for annoying. And ecstasy. I love that we can use that word too. And it's not a drug. I cannot see why Mrs. Foster should ask me as well as Lydia, said she. I thought I am not her particular friend. I have just as much right to be asked as she has, and more too, for I am 2 years older. Fumoko voice, extreme violence! Classic devastating news. The worst person you know was totally right moment. Yes, exactly. In vain did Elizabeth attempt to make her reasonable, and Jane to make her resigned. As for Elizabeth herself, this invitation was so far from exciting in her the same feelings as in her mother and Lydia, that she considered it as the death warrant of all possibility of common sense for the latter. And detestable as such a step must take her, were it known, she could not help secretly advising her father not to let her go. She represented to him all the proprieties of Lydia's general behaviour, the little advantage she could derive from the friendship of such a woman as Mrs. Foster, and the probability of her being yet more imprudent with such a companion at Brighton, where the temptations must much be greater than home. He heard her attentively, and then said, Lydia will never be easy till she has exposed herself in some public place or other, and we can never expect her to do it with so little expense or inconvenience to her family as under the present circumstances. I do love the use of violence, very much so. If you were aware, said Elizabeth, of the very great disadvantages to us all, we must arise from public notice of Lydia's unguarded and imprudent manner, nay, which has already arisen from it. I am sure you would judge differently in the affair. Already arisen? Repeated Mr. Bennet. What? Has she frightened away some of your lovers? Poor little Lizzie. But do not be cast down. Such squeamish youths cannot bear to be connected with a little absurdity, are not worth a regret. Come, let me see the list of pitiful fellows who have been kept aloof by Lydia's folly. She's letting it out on y'all. Indeed, you are mistaken. I have no such injuries to resent. It is not of particular, but of general evils, which I am now complaining. Our importance, our respectability in the world, must be affected by the wild velocity, the assurance and disdain of all restraint which mark Lydia's character. Excuse me, for I must speak plainly. If you, my dear father, will not take the trouble of checking her impudent spirits, and of teaching her present pursuits are not to be the business of her life, she will soon be beyond the reach of amendment. Her character will be fixed, and she will, at 16, be the most determined flirt that ever made herself and her family ridiculous. A flirt, too, in the worst and meanest degree of flirtation, without any attraction beyond youth and a tolerable person, and from the ignorance and emptiness of her mind, wholly unable to ward off any portion of that universal contempt which her rage for admiration will entice. Rage as well. Rage for admiration. I like it. I like it when words are used differently. Rage being used for ambition. I like it. In this danger, Kitty is also comprehended. She will follow wherever Lydia leads, vain, ignorant, idle, and absolutely uncontrolled. Oh, my dear father, can you suppose it possible that they will not be censured and despised whenever they are known, and their sisters will not often be involved in the disgrace? Mr. Bennet saw that her whole heart was in the subject, and, affectionately taking her hand, said in reply, "Do not make yourself uneasy, my love. Whenever you and Jane are known, you must be represented and valued, and you will not appear to less advantage for having a couple of, or I may say 3, very silly sisters. We shall have no peace at Longbourn if Lydia does not go to Brighton. Let her go, then. Colonel Forster is a sensible man, and will keep her out of any real mischief, and she is lucky to be an object of prey to anybody. At Brighton she will be of less importance, even as a common flirt, than she has been here. The officers will find women better worth their notice. Let us hope, therefore, that her being there may teach her her own insignificance. At any rate, she cannot grow many degrees worse without authorizing us to lock her up for the rest of her life." With this answer, Elizabeth was forced to be content, but her own opinion continued the same, and she left him disappointed and sorry. It was not in her nature, however, to increase her vexations by dwelling on them. She was confident of having performed her duty, and to fret over unavoidable evils, or augment them by anxiety, was no part of her disposition. Had Lydia and her mother known the substance of her confidence with her father, their indignation would hardly have found expression in their united volubility. In Lydia's imagination, a visit to Brighton comprised every possibility of earthly happiness. She saw, with the creative eye of fancy, the streets of that gay bathing place, not grey, very different, covered with officers. She saw herself the object of attention to tens and to scores of them, at present unknown. She saw all the glories of the camp, its tents stretched forth in beauteous uniformity of lines, crowded with the young and the gay, and dazzling with scarlet. And to complete the view, she saw herself seated beneath the tent, tenderly flirting with at least 6 officers at once. This girl cannot be stopped. I love this. I love the illustrations in this book. Look at her go. What a boss. What a girl boss. Had she known that her sister sought to tear her from such prospects and such realities as these, what would have been her sensations? They could have been understood only by her mother, who might have felt nearly the same. Lydia's going to Brighton was all that consoled her for the melancholy conviction of her husband's never intending to go there himself. But they were entirely ignorant of what had passed, and their raptures continued, with little intermission, to the very day of Lydia's leaving home. Elizabeth was now to see Mr. Wickham for the last time. Having been frequently in company with him since her return, agitation was pretty well over. The agitations of former partiality entirely so. She had even learnt to detect